Hi, I'm Gemma from Leighton Park School, and today we're going to have a series of lessons about the heart and exercise. So after this lesson you will meet some of our students and you will be measuring your own heart rate and seeing the effect of exercise. So what does the heart do? Well, the heart is part of the circulatory system and it is a pump. It pumps blood, and if you have a look here you can see where it is. So if we take away the lungs, then you can see that very close to the lungs we have the heart. So the heart is a pump. What on earth do you think it is made of? See if you can write that down. So the heart is a pump which is going to be pumping blood around the body, and you can see here that we have got some blood vessels, and these blood vessels will go to every single part of your body. You will have arteries, you have veins, and you have capillaries. And it's a little bit like our system of roads. So we have our motorways, which take lots of traffic to lots of parts of the country. We have got our arteries here, which will be taking blood all over the body. But then they will separate into smaller roads, like our A roads, and then even smaller roads, like our B roads. And then when we get to your house, you will have your drive, and that's very similar to the capillaries. So capillaries are absolutely tiny, they are almost microscopic, and they go to every single cell. Each of your cells is no more than 1 or 2 cells away from a capillary. So here we've got a kidney which has been given some plastic inside, and then the rest of the kidney has been dissolved away, and you can see that all of these tiny little structures are the capillaries which go to your kidneys, and all of your body will be like that. There are lots and lots of these tiny capillaries. So what is it that our blood is actually transporting around the body? See if you can pause the video and think what we might be transporting. So our blood vessels are really important because they will transport blood, and blood is mostly made from water, and in that water we have lots of things which are dissolved. So we will have glucose and we will have oxygen. Those are the two most important things. But why on earth do we need those? Well, every single cell in your body needs to respire. That means that it needs to get energy, and we get that energy from food. So our digestive system all around here is where our food will go once we have eaten it, and from there our food will go into our bloodstream. It then can be transported to every single cell in the body. But where do we get our oxygen from? Well, our oxygen is going to come from our lungs, and when you breathe you take in air, and that air contains oxygen, and that oxygen will diffuse into your bloodstream. So that's why it's really important that our heart is very, very close to our lungs, because that means that we can go straight there. So our blood transports lots of things. It's mostly made of water, which is called plasma, and it transports food that you have digested from your digestive system. It also transports oxygen, but lots of other things as well. For example, hormones, which will help you grow, antibodies, which might help against infections and disease. But we're going to focus today on two things: glucose and oxygen. So what is glucose? Glucose is a sugar, and where on earth do we get glucose from? Well, glucose comes from the food that we eat. So once we have eaten our food, that food will go down to our digestive system, and all of this digestive system will be able to digest and then absorb that food. So where does that glucose go to? Well, it goes straight into the bloodstream so that it can be delivered to every single cell in your body. So the digestive system has a really good blood supply. But what about the oxygen? Where does that come from? Well, the oxygen comes from your lungs. So when you breathe in air, oxygen from the air will diffuse into your lungs, and then it will get into your bloodstream. And one of the reasons that your heart is so close to your lungs is for that reason, that we need to be able to oxygenate that blood. And why do we need these things? So what is oxygen and what is glucose needed for? Well, it's needed for a process called respiration. Every single cell in your body does this process, and it's the way in which we get the energy out of glucose. And if our cells don't do that, they won't survive. So when you're talking about exercise later, you've got to remember that when we do exercise, our muscles will be respiring lots in order to make those muscles contract and for you to be able to move. So in order for that to happen, we need to get blood to those muscles really, really quickly. So we have this wonderful network of arteries, veins and capillaries which takes blood to all of our cells, but that isn't enough to get the blood around the body. We need to be able to push it around the body, so we need a pump. So that's why we need our heart. That's all it does, it is just a pump. But how on earth does it do that? Well, it's because it is made of a tissue called muscle. It's very similar to the muscles in your legs or your arms which enable you to move, but it is very, very special because it never ever tires. Imagine if you went on a long run, eventually your muscles will get very tired and you would have to stop. You wouldn't be able to run every second of every day. But your heart has never stopped once. It has never been tired. It never will be tired. So it's really, really special. So our heart is a pump and it in fact has 4 chambers. So if we opened it up, we would see that there are these smaller chambers at the top, which are called the atria. And then we have these thicker chambers at the bottom, which are the ventricles. And they've got thick muscular walls so that they can pump the blood. So blood comes in through our vein, which is called the vena cava, and then is pumped to the right ventricle. It then has to go up through an artery called the pulmonary artery to the lungs, and that's where we get rid of carbon dioxide and we take in the oxygen. But if our blood went straight from there to the rest of our body, then it just wouldn't have enough pressure to be able to get to your head, to the tips of your fingers and to your toes. So we need to take the blood back to the heart so that it can be pumped and pushed as far as we can get it. So straight from the lungs, it comes back to the heart in the pulmonary vein into the left ventricle. And you can see here that on this model, our left ventricle is much thicker with its wall compared to the right ventricle, because this has to pump blood much further. It needs a greater pressure for it to get blood to every single part of your body. So we've looked at a model heart, but they're not really the same as looking at a real heart. So if you're feeling a little bit squeamish, this is the time to pause the video. But if you would like to see what a real heart looks like, you need to stay watching. So this is a sheep's heart, and it's about the same size as a human heart. And if you imagine about the size of your fist, that would be the size of your heart. And it is in the centre of your body. People often think it's on the left, but it isn't. It's just that if you look at it, it isn't symmetrical. For those reasons that we talked about, that the left side is much thicker and therefore bigger because it's sending blood to the whole of the body, not just to the lungs that are close by. And when you're looking at living tissue, it's important to look at it, to feel it, to touch it, to smell it. You can't do that. And to notice things before you cut into it. So the first thing you notice is the difference in colour. So down here it's very, very dark, it's red. And then up here it's quite pale. And that's because this is made of a different tissue. This is actually made of fat. Now often we think of fat as being something that is bad for us, but it's actually really, really important. So all of your internal organs are covered in what we call visceral fat. And a little bit of that fat is really important for protecting the organs. If there's too much of it though, that's not so good. This part of the heart is the tissue, which is that cardiac muscle that can contract and relax. So it's literally pumping. And that is the tissue that never ever tires. And the reason that it is that colour is because obviously the heart itself needs its own blood supply because it needs a lot of energy from respiration in order to contract and relax. So you can see here on the outside that there are these coronary blood vessels, and they are the vessels which take the blood to the heart itself and therefore provide it with all of that glucose and oxygen that it requires. So what we can then do is open up the heart and have a little look inside. And again, you can see just how thick it is. Very, very thick muscular walls. But what's interesting is at the top here, we have got this little region here. Now this is called a heart valve, and it's very much like a trap door. It basically closes once the blood has gone through. So blood will come from the atria at the top. Unfortunately, often when they go to the butchers, these parts will be chopped off, but this here is the top part called the atrium. Blood will be pumped through there. It will push open the valves because of the high pressure, and then when the blood fills in the ventricle, it will generate a high pressure which will close that trapdoor, and that valve will close, so that blood will be pumped out into the arteries. And it's got these little strings here which are very strong, you can see. So these are the tendinous cords, sometimes called the heartstrings. People sometimes say that you're pulling at their heartstrings, and that is because they are really, really, really strong. And they keep the valve in the right place so that it doesn't flip backwards, and so that we can keep the blood flowing in a one-way direction. So now we're going to talk about the head versus the heart. You probably heard that expression before. Can you die of a broken heart? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but is there an emotional connection between the heart and your feelings? Well, actually there is, and you've probably all experienced this before. So for example, if you are nervous about something, maybe you've got a test coming up or a musical performance or a really big sports fixture, you probably notice that not only do you feel things differently, but that your heart will respond. So for example, your heart rate might increase, and that is because our heart is very much connected to our brains. So how can we communicate these emotions to our heart? Well, there's two ways that cells communicate. One is with hormones and the other is with the nervous system. So if you're feeling a little bit worried or anxious, then we have something called the fight or flight response, and a hormone called adrenaline is released into your bloodstream, and one of the places that it acts is upon the heart, and that will increase your heart rate and also your breathing rate. And that's actually quite helpful because it means that you will get more oxygen and glucose to your cells. So is it possible to be heartbroken? People often say that somebody has broken their heart and they seem perfectly fine. Is it possible for actually physical damage to be caused by an emotional pain? Well, actually it is. It's very, very rare, and it's called stress-induced cardiomyopathy, and it will damage the heart, but most cases it doesn't damage it permanently and it is okay, so don't worry about it. But it's just another really good example of how your emotional state can affect the physical parts of your body. Another good question is it possible to break your heartstrings? Remember in the video earlier I was talking about the heartstrings which were attached to the valves. It's really unlikely that these heartstrings will ever break. As you saw, they're really, really tough. But they are attached to the valves, and the valves can become damaged over time or because of an infection, and that's one of the most common operations that people have to have with their heart, is for those heart valves to be replaced or repaired. So the other really fascinating thing about the heart is that it is a particular type of muscle called cardiac muscle that we talked about, and that is really special because it never ever tires, which is really important. But the other thing that's important is that we describe the heart as being myogenic. So the heart is a muscle, and in order for it to contract and relax, we have to give it a little bit of electricity, and that electricity comes from our nerves. Now those nerves are attached to all of our muscles, and it's the nerves which will tell our muscles to contract. So when you're walking or running or me talking, we get that message from our nervous system. However, the heart is different. It doesn't need those nerves to tell it to contract. It is always contracting and relaxing. It is right now. So what we have inside our heart is a very special region, which is about here, which is called the pacemaker, and that generates the electrical activity which causes the heart to be able to contract and relax, and it does it all by itself. It doesn't need any stimulus from the rest of the body. And again, that is another really, really common operation that people sometimes have to have, is they can have an artificial pacemaker added there to make sure that their heart is beating in sinus rhythm, so it is a really good rhythm. But that's something that would be really interesting. If you could take a live heart out of somebody, it would actually continue to beat even if it wasn't attached to anything. But obviously it would run out of glucose and oxygen and would stop after a while. So we talked earlier about the blood and we said the things that it transported, but we didn't talk about the cells inside the blood. And here we've got one. This is a red blood cell. It doesn't really have eyes, sorry about that, but it does have a really important shape. And if you can see, it looks a little bit like a donut. It goes in on this side and it goes in on this side, and that gives it a really big surface area so that oxygen can diffuse really easily into those. And we have billions of these. All of them are transporting lots of oxygen. But why is it red? Most of our cells are not red. It's red because it contains an important protein called hemoglobin, and hemoglobin contains iron. Now, iron, when it reacts with oxygen, turns red, and so that's why these are red. But it's also really important why you have a healthy diet, because if you eat lots of green fruit and vegetables, you will get lots of iron. But another really important source of iron is chocolate, especially dark chocolate, so that's why I eat lots of it. So now you're going to be investigating your own heart rate and finding out how exercise affects the rate with which it beats. So there's two ways that you can do this. One is that you can listen to your carotid artery, which is the artery which is taking blood to your brain. And if you put your fingers next to it and just listen gently, you will hear it going like this, da-dum, da-dum. And that's the sound of the valves that we talked about closing. So every time it goes da-dum, that's one heartbeat. And you're going to be asked to record how many of those you can hear in 15 seconds. Another way is on your wrist, and you can place your fingers just there like that. Don't use your thumb though, because there is a little pulse in your thumb. And again, you can just feel your heart rate. So when you're exercising, you need to get more blood to your muscles so that they can have more oxygen and more glucose for more respiration, so they can move more. But there's another thing that we need to get rid of in our blood, a waste product. So respiration makes carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is very acidic, so we can't have it in our bloodstream. We need to take it to the lungs, and we need to get rid of it in our exhaled air. So you'll also notice when you are doing your exercise that not only will your heart rate increase, but also your breathing rate will increase in order to get in more oxygen and to take away more carbon dioxide. But what happens if you do so much exercise that you get to the limit that your heart can beat and that your lungs can ventilate? Well, then your muscles start to do something really clever. It's called anaerobic respiration. So when Usain Bolt is winning his 200 meters, that's because his muscles are using anaerobic respiration. For a very, very short time, your muscles can respire without oxygen, but that causes a toxic buildup of lactic acid. And that's what causes your legs to hurt when you have done your daily mile and you have done lots of exercise. So I'm going to leave you there because you're going to do some exercise with some of our sixth form students.